As Monica said, this is my project. It's time to come clean about cooking. What my project does is investigate how we can use applied statistical methods through machine learning to help solve big social issues about equity and health, especially as that pertains to women and children's health. This map shows you which parts of the world have access to clean cooking fuels. It's not a coincidence that clean cooking fuels are distributed throughout a lot of North America, Europe, South America. There is a really clear divide by income in which parts of the world have dirty or clean fuel access. And if we want to quantify total access to clean and dirty fuels, the World Economic Forum estimates that 1/3 of people globally are still depending on dirty fuels. The rates of dependence are highest in Africa, as you can see by the light colors on the map. But within Africa, there's still some variation between which countries have more or less access. South Africa, the country that I'm focusing on at the bottom of the map, has relatively high access to clean fuels for the continent. The issue of dirty and clean fuel use has significant implications for health. Worldwide, indoor air pollution is the single largest environmental risk factor for female mortality and the leading killer of children under the age of 5. It's estimated that there are more deaths from dirty fuel than there are from malaria every year. But still, it's not an issue that is talked about as widely. When a woman is cooking using a traditional stove in an unventilated room throughout the day, it has the equivalent impact on her health as would smoking at least 100 cigarettes. Overall, household air pollution is responsible for 3.2 million deaths annually. Clearly, indoor cooking fires and the fumes released from traditional fuels and dirty fuels are accounting for a large share of this because of how deadly they are. When a woman burns a biofuel, which could be dung or plant matter, it releases toxic gases, which can cause cancer, pneumonia, and other diseases, which are having these long-term health consequences for women and children who spend most of their time indoors relative to other people. To try and address this issue, I pose a central question. How can machine learning reduce household reliance on dirty cooking fuels? And to answer this question, I developed my goal, which is to predict which households in South Africa are using clean and dirty fuels to guide a welfare intervention. In the past, other researchers did similar work on different countries. For example, there was research done on Afghanistan and Australia, which demonstrated that machine learning can predict which households are at risk of poverty or lowest income. And then the government can use that information to figure out who needs assistance. And that's the same approach that I took with my data on South Africa. I chose South Africa because South Africa is higher income in Africa, which is my continent of interest. That's important because for implementing a welfare intervention, like providing clean fuel or providing clean stoves and improved ventilation, there has to be a large amount of financial resources. So I chose South Africa due to its greater ability to implement a solution. The country has a little bit more than 10% of its population still using dirty fuels, which means although the country mostly uses clean fuels, I still have enough observations in my data set to allow my models to predict both dirty and clean fuel use with significant accuracy. To accomplish my goal and answer this question, I developed and tuned 4 models. The first one, K-nearest neighbors. The second, logistic model with forward selection. Third, support vector machine. And finally, an ensemble that aggregated all 3 models together to make a prediction. The main reason I'm doing this is because forecasting improves welfare targeting. It allows governments to spread their limited resources further because they don't have to spend resources on households that don't need help when they know exactly who is in need of assistance. I use data from the demographic and health surveys. I chose 17 variables from a data set of about 400, cleaned the data, and collapsed my individual level observations to the household level. So my data overall had 10,722 household level observations after the cleaning process. After my data was prepared, I wanted to understand some of the underlying trends and relationships between the variables. To do that, I conducted multiple components analysis and principal components analysis. To highlight a few of the trends, first off, we have that male households are similar to urban households. Moreover, there was strong relationships between the types of assets households had and their overall characteristics. Households that shared toilets were similar to those without a mobile phone, which makes sense because both of those would depend on how much money a household has. And finally, that the number of eligible women and household size are also correlated. These findings informed my choice of model throughout the rest of my project and the approach I took. Knowing that the variables were related, I chose for one of my 4 models to do a logistic model with forward selection. The forward selection meant that I was only including variables from my 17 that I had prepared in the model if they improved the model's performance through the AIC criteria. And this leads to my main result, which is that the logistic model with forward selection proved to be the most effective one at identifying which households had clean and dirty fuel use. Let's look at some of the other models as well. The second model I used was the K and N model, K nearest neighbors. For this model, I not only predicted if households use clean or dirty fuel, but I also wanted to compare the accuracy of these predictions to the accuracy of predicting a variable that was more complicated. Instead of just predicting dirty and clean fuel, I also asked the model to predict what type of fuel was used. Some categories included electricity, coal, dung, plant matter, and that was my 7-category model, which is the blue line in the figure in front of you. And as you can see, the blue line shows the error through the training process, and the blue dot shows the error rate on the test data. Similarly, the red line and red dot show the training and test error. And as you can see, with 2 categories on the red model, we have better performance than using 7 categories by about 5 percentage points, which was significant enough to inform to me as a researcher to focus on just having 2 outcome categories, dirty and clean fuel use. I also created a support vector machine model. The support vector machine model had the lowest performance on the test data. I used 112 combinations of cost and gamma to select my final parameters of cost as 0.5 and gamma as 0.05. So on this figure, that would be the very top edge of the graph on like the left side. And this was really interesting because the training data gave us a pretty low cost value, and it's not the darkest region on the map. The darkest region on the map, which would have been the best parameters for the test data, were actually further to the right, which suggests that possibly this model was too much simplified by having a too low cost based on the training data. This figure provides an overview and comparison of all the 4 models and is the first introduction to some of the results from my ensemble model. The ensemble model just aggregated the previous 3 and implemented majority voting to predict households' dirty or clean fuel use. And interestingly, support vector machine performed the best on training data and the worst on test error. And the logistic model was the best for the test error and about in the middle of the pack for the training error. Overall, this research has implications for humanitarian issues. It allows resources to better reach people who are in need of help through different fuel uses or technology that countries can distribute. $100 can go a lot further if you just give it to the households in need in a small scenario than if you gave it to 100 people. Giving $100 to 100 people means every person gets $1. Giving $100 to the 25 with the most need means everyone gets $4. It's the same way for aid. If we can figure out who actually needs help and who needs assistance the most accurately, we can create a bigger intervention and do work that previously wasn't possible because we didn't have the financial resources to do so. It also means we're not guessing anymore who needs help, and countries no longer have the excuse that it's too expensive to take action. I'm currently expanding on this research by working on it for my senior thesis at Barnard. I am including more variables, approximately 100, and also using a random forest model and applying shrinkage to help identify the most impactful variables amongst the larger set. So thank you to everyone for listening. And if you have any questions, send them in the chat.